So, um, as I was preparing uh, this lecture, I'm also teaching theories this summer, but I haven't taught lifespan in a long time. Um, and I've noticed that there is a little overlap in between the courses, and I would really like to separate um, theory that is used for therapy um, versus developmental theory, and I'd like to separate them just a little more so that you're able to distinguish between those theories, and yet as you move through this broader curriculum, see how it all connects. So I hope that makes sense. With all that being said, um, I've decided that uh, I'm going to do classical and operant conditioning, so Watson and Skinner in and Lazarus, multimodal therapy in theories. And I'm going to do Bandura, social learning theory in um, lifespan. So, however, I am providing the notes for all of them to both the classes, just so you'll have the notes as a reference for studying for your larger exams. Um, but that's why I'm not covering, even though it's in both books, uh, for both courses. I think it's better if I spent my time on new information for each class rather than uh, repetitive information. So it's good, you'll still get um, a refresher on those theories as you read the chapters in your textbook. You'll also have the information in your notes, and they will mention this in a lot of the films on demand videos that I have posted. One other thing before we jump into social learning theory, um, I did post um, a couple videos from Films on Demand, and uh, they do mention Freud, but don't worry, it's only like a minute or two, and then it'll move on to morality theorists or social learning theories. So don't worry, um, it's only a brief mention. I know we've already covered that. Okay, so let's look at, so it's Albert Bandura. Um, Primarily, there are other social learning theorists, but he's really the one I want to talk about. Um, I had the opportunity to uh, go to one of his lectures at a conference when I was in a master's degree. It was the APA conference, American Psychological Association. He was older then, but he was still doing research. Um, I think uh, I have kind of this love-hate relationship with social learning theory. Um, so let me tell you what I find annoying and then what I find fascinating. Um, so what I find annoying is that um, Bandura often states and studies what most people see as obvious, and he states it and studies it in a way as if it's a brand new theory. So some examples are um, children learn by modeling and imitating. Um, that seems fairly obvious, but maybe it's not. I'm sure nobody bothered to coin that terminology and study it in as much depth as Bandura, and he does that with a lot of his theory. Now, the positive thing, and there's a lot of fascinating things about his theory, um, and I do like Bandura. Um, so the good thing is it takes you from those extremely basic concepts to some really advanced stuff, especially for when he was doing these studies. Um, some of the really wonderful things was the study of violence and how children learn violence and aggression, um, and testifying in front of Congress and all kinds of just really cool things that he has done. The concept of self-efficacy. Um, okay, so let's look at the theory, social learning theory. Um, so psychologists began to apply many ideas from earlier behaviorism to the development of social behavior. Bandura noticed that children learn by watching and listening others, not only adults, but other children as well. And this learning took place through modeling and imitation. So somebody else would model, the children would imitate. Um, and he called this observational learning. The interesting thing, when I watch my own children is, uh, they model both positive and negative behavior. And I am uh, in horror sometimes when I hear my own words coming out of my children's mouths, and it makes me uh, work on changing for the better. Um, Social learning theory relates directly to social cognition or thinking relating to behavior. Children develop a sense of self-efficacy or beliefs about their own abilities and personal standards for behavior through observations and feedback. People begin to control their own learning and behavior through the choices they make. Um, we make decisions regarding what models and characteristics are worth imitating. So what would the reward be, or the payoff, or the feeling? But let's talk about self-efficacy. Um, so I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. Uh, Self-efficacy is related but different than self-esteem. Self-efficacy, beliefs about our own abilities. Um, so self-esteem, feeling good about ourselves or not. Um, so uh, I would say about 20 years ago when I was a school counselor, um, a lot of uh, things were coming out uh, that in order to help raise self-efficacy, they believed that children needed higher self-esteem. Well, let me explain how self-efficacy relates to learning. So, um, if you had all students with the same ability and IQ in a study, and but some of them had high self-efficacy and others had low self-efficacy, even though they all had the same ability and they all had the same IQ. And they were all given the same task. Uh, the ones with high self-efficacy would achieve more than the ones with low self-efficacy when they were challenged in the task, when the task was challenging. So what happens is children with high self-efficacy believe that they should be able to accomplish something, and they try over and over again, believing that they should be able to do it. So they are internally motivated to succeed. Um, Whereas children with low self-efficacy, when they are challenged by a task, often give up because they do not have the same belief that they should be able to accomplish the task. Um, so, uh, and of course, we know that that can be related to self-esteem as well. Here's the interesting thing in schools that happened. We cannot give a child high self-efficacy or high self-esteem simply by helping them to succeed or rewarding their success. So let's look at those things separately. There was a lot of help for children so that they might succeed, and there was a lot of rewards for children when they did succeed, even a small bit. Now, over the years, we've realized that this does not result in higher self-efficacy or higher self-esteem. What this does is it results in entitlement issues, believing that children might believe that they either deserved help or deserved an A, when in reality they did not, or they worked for an external reward. And when there was no reward, the motivation was lost. So it did not achieve higher self-esteem or self-efficacy. So how do you achieve higher self-efficacy and self-esteem? Well, we're going to talk about this in a different class when we go over Bronfenbrenner and Vygotsky and concept of scaffolding. So what needs to happen is children need to be challenged in a task, and that task needs to be suited for each child. So you don't want a task that, you don't want to give a student a task that they're going to fail, that they are not capable of doing. You don't want to give them a task that's too easy either. You want to give them a task that they have to work hard in order to achieve. And then the reward is not like a sticker or a pack of gum or something external. The reward is praise and an internal sense that they succeeded. So that creates internal motivation through scaffolding. Scaffolding is when you create a task that's neither too hard or too easy. Here's why that is so hard in our current school system. Our classes are extremely large. Our teachers have to teach towards standardized tests rather than individual needs. It is very hard to scaffold a task so that it fits over 25 kids. So it's just difficult to give students more individual attention. It's also difficult to teach them where they're at versus teaching to a standardized tests that rewards school systems with fundings, but that's a whole other issue. So that's kind of the concept of self-efficacy. I use what's called mastery learning when I can. I can't do that with exams, but any paper or presentation or anything like that, or especially in like our skills and techniques class, people can redo counseling tapes as many times as they want, but I want students to graduate understanding these concepts. Um, I would rather give them a second chance to redo a paper or a presentation uh, so that they understand the material when they go into practicum or with real clients. I would rather that than them get a B. So I would rather have a student earn an A, and it is still earning an A as long as they continue to work and try and understand. So, okay, so these theories can be somewhat limiting in that modeling can only take one's expertise so far. So, for instance, learning to play a violin, um, you can watch somebody play, but it really takes practice and instruction and more depth than simply modeling. Continuous or discontinuous theories. Um, Discontinuous are considered stage theories. Continuous are more cognitive or behavioral theories. The example would be butterfly would be discontinuous or stages. Butterfly is a caterpillar and then a chrysalis and then a butterfly, 3 stages. A tree is gradually growing. You wouldn't know that it has grown unless you leave and come back. And that would be continuous development. Excuse me. Nature or nurture, um, because learning contributes to development. Uh, I think it's a little bit of both, but um, nature is you're born with certain understanding. Nurture is you learn from our environment. Of course, we know it's both. Um, Modeling is directly related to learned uh, not only morality, but the model must practice what he or she preaches. So, for instance, I could tell my children to do something or not to do something. However, they are going to follow what I actually do myself. They're going to model my actions more than my lecture. So, one of the things that Bandura really looked at is punishment. He believes that we can learn aggression just as we learn anything else. Um, we can also rely more on empathy, time out, stop and think, things like that, um, rather than spanking or physical punishment or an aggressive parent or guardian like yelling or something like that. There needs to be an appropriate consequence. So the consequence we try to um, make fit the misbehavior. If a child dumps out all their toys, they have to clean up all their toys. Some social learning examples from my own experience. One time I ate at a fancy restaurant. There were more forks and knives and spoons and bowls than I knew what to do with. So, of course, I looked at another table and saw, oh, well, that's a salad fork. And, that is a coffee spoon. And, I think there were like 4 of each. Um, and peers are very important during adolescence. In fact, they take on more importance than parents or guardians, especially where there's drinking, drugs, sexuality. So one of my favorite stories about Bandura is his bop bags. And so he was studying how children learn violence from television programs. And they had two types of two groups of children, two types of television programs. Then they had a playroom, and in the playroom they had all different kinds of toys. But he invented the bop bag, and that's that blow up clown with sand in the bottom, and when you punch it, it goes back, but it comes back up again. Bandura would get hundreds of these every year for his autograph. And so the way he set up these studies was uh, he would have one group of children look at something very nice like Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers, and he would have the other group of children look at a more violent television program. And of course, the children who watched the violent program were playing more violent. They displayed more violence after the program. And he actually went and testified in front of Congress. And for a while, they did put limits on broadcasting, like limiting sexuality and violence and mature themes until 9 o'clock at night, when they thought all young children should be in bed. They would put ratings on every program. That's when all of the broadcasting networks used federal airwaves. Now, the government cannot control it so much because everything is owned independently through cable companies, and you can't put the same restrictions on cable as you can on federally funded airwaves. So now we're seeing a lot more sexuality during the day, violence during the day. It's very difficult to keep children away from that programming. And as a result, children are learning much more from their media. A big example is video games. They have become really, really much more violent and realistic. And yet they don't get a sense of their own mortality, because if they die in a video game or kill somebody else in a video game, they just press the button and the game starts over. They come back to life. So it's really unrealistic. And yet they're learning some pretty violent stuff. I want to give you some other terminology here. Vicarious reinforcement is the observation of the praise or punishment of others, and the application of those observations to one's own actions or beliefs. So we don't have to be praised or punished ourselves in order to learn. We can see how other people are praised or punished for their actions and incorporate that into our own decisions. Reciprocal determinism means that the environment alters us, but we also alter the environment. It becomes cyclical. You may recognize another name or see it on an exam. John Rotter, he also did a lot in social learning. And of course, behavior modification combines behaviorism and social learning to quite an extent. Okay, so that is really social learning theory, and that's what I wanted to discuss for this class, but you have all the notes, and you'll receive all of the lectures in theory on classic, operant, and multimodal therapy.